The story opens not with a headline or a newsreel, but with the metallic groan of a lock being pried open. It is 2024, and inside a dusty storage facility on the outskirts of a quiet town, bidders gather for what they expect to be nothing more than a routine locker auction. The air smells of mildew and rust. Fluorescent bulbs flicker overhead, casting pale light across a row of doors painted in chipped, industrial green. For most attendees, it is simply another chance to find forgotten furniture or collectible junk. But when the auctioneer calls out number 57, the tone shifts. The lock resists. The hasp has been cut before and welded shut again, as if someone wanted not just to secure it, but to bury what lay inside. A few in the crowd lean closer, drawn by the unusual stubbornness of the door. When the lock finally yields, the air that escapes is thick, stale, carrying a faint scent of paper and mothballs, mixed with something acrid, like burned cloth. Inside, instead of boxes of kitchenware or stacks of photo albums, the bidders see a collection of items arranged with unnerving deliberation. A metal trunk sits dead center, its lid ajar as though waiting to be found. Resting on top is a folded black habit, pressed flat and brittle with age. Nearby, a rosary is coiled neatly, its beads darkened and cracked. On the floor lies a stack of journals bound with twine, the pages yellowed and curling at the edges. At first, no one understands the significance. But then one of the bidders, a local man, recognizes the initials embroidered faintly on the inside of the habit. His voice trembles as he mutters a name that has not been spoken publicly in years. One of the 5 nuns who disappeared in 1995. The auctioneer, unsettled, pauses the sale. People murmur among themselves, recalling vague stories from their youth, rumors of women arrested during the unrest, taken to a detention center and never seen again. Officially, the state had long closed that chapter, insisting that the nuns had been transferred and later released. Yet no parish records ever showed them returning. Families were told to move on. The locker's contents, however, refused to fit within that tidy narrative. Each item seems placed to whisper a fragment of the story. Uniforms that should have been archived or destroyed. Journals that detail days and dates no one remembers. And an old tape recorder with a cracked microphone, its spool still wound with magnetic tape. One by one, the crowd edges closer. Some take photographs with their phones. Others step back, unsettled. The silence stretches, until broken by the low hum of the tape recorder when a curious bidder brushes the play button. A faint click is heard, followed by static, then muffled voices too distorted to decipher in the noisy room. It lasts only a few seconds before the tape snaps back, leaving everyone frozen. In that moment, what was supposed to be a forgotten locker becomes something else entirely. A vault of evidence no one had claimed. A door left half open to a mystery buried for nearly 3 decades. Authorities are called, and within hours the storage facility is cordoned off. Reporters begin to gather outside, sensing that what was found is more than an oddity. The items are catalogued under the cold light of police evidence lamps, each piece bagged and tagged. But there is a hesitation in the air, an unspoken recognition that these objects were never meant to resurface. The official line had been sealed, repeated for nearly 30 years. The 5 nuns were safely transferred, their case closed. Yet here lies proof of another story, one locked away and abandoned until chance forced it into daylight. In the days that follow, whispers spread quickly. Who paid the rent on the locker all these years? Why did no one claim it when payments stopped? And why now in 2024 does it finally open? These questions mark the true beginning of the investigation, the moment the past demands to be re-examined. What was once dismissed as rumor suddenly feels concrete. The habits and journals and broken recorder serving as artifacts of erasure. In the dim glow of that storage corridor, history stirs awake, refusing to remain silent. In 1995, the country was already drowning in suspicion. The air of that year was heavy with curfews, loudspeakers barking orders, and the quiet terror of knowing that anyone could be taken in for questioning and never return. Among those caught in the tide were 5 women who had taken vows of silence, poverty, and obedience. 5 nuns whose lives until then had been defined by prayer, teaching, and tending to the sick in their parish. Their disappearance did not erupt in headlines. It unfolded quietly, like a page removed from a book. Witnesses at the time remembered soldiers arriving at the convent before dawn. Trucks without insignia idled outside, their engines humming low. The sisters, dressed in their habits, were led out one by one, their heads bowed. Some neighbors whispered that the women had sheltered students involved in protests. Others claimed they had spoken against abuses from the pulpit. The truth was never confirmed. By nightfall, the convent stood empty, its chapel door unlatched, hymnals still open on the pews. No one dared to step inside. Officially, the detentions were noted in a single, Small column article buried in the back of a state-run newspaper. It listed the women's names, their order, and stated they had been brought in for temporary questioning. 3 days later, that article was gone. The archives where it had been stored replaced the page with one about agricultural reforms. The sisters were said to have been transferred to another jurisdiction. Families were never told where. Parish leaders who asked too many questions found themselves reassigned, often to distant provinces where their voices carried little weight. For those who knew the 5 women personally, the silence that followed was unbearable. Parents of the students they once taught gathered at the convent, waiting for word. Letters sent to the detention facility were returned unopened, stamped with a red seal, recipient unknown. One brother of a missing nun traveled from office to office, pleading for information. He was eventually told to stop asking before he caused trouble for himself. Within weeks, photographs of the sisters vanished from parish notice boards, replaced with smiling portraits of state-approved clergy. The most haunting detail was how quickly the memory of their detention was scrubbed from public record. It was not only that the nuns had disappeared, it was that the world was asked to pretend they had never been there at all. The convent where they had lived was reassigned to another order. Their personal effects, letters, garments, even baptismal records, were quietly removed. Those who remembered them described the sensation not as grief, but as erasure, a blank space where 5 lives should have been. Yet the story refused to vanish completely. In hushed conversations after Mass, families would sometimes whisper their names, lowering their voices as though even remembering them might invite punishment. Candlelit vigils were held in secret, quickly extinguished whenever patrol cars passed by. A generation grew up knowing of the 5 sisters, not as figures of faith, but as shadows, cautionary tales of what could happen to anyone who stepped outside the sanctioned line. For nearly 30 years, the story remained lodged in that space between rumor and forbidden memory. Families learned not to ask. Parish leaders avoided the subject. Journalists who tried to revisit the case found closed doors and missing files. To many, the 5 nuns became ghosts, symbols of a lost decade, buried beneath silence. That is why the locker found in 2024 struck like a lightning bolt. It was not simply the discovery of fabric and journals. It was the return of voices that had been silenced. Tangible proof that the official narrative was built on absence and deception. The past, so carefully erased, had written itself back into the present. The detention center sits at the edge of the city like a wound that never healed. Overgrown weeds choke the perimeter fence, their tendrils wrapping through rusted chain links that once kept people in rather than out. The main gate hangs crooked on one hinge, its paint faded to a colorless gray, stenciled letters barely visible. State Security Facility. Locals call it the grounds. For decades, no one has used the place, yet its presence looms like an unspoken curse. Children cross the street when passing it, and older residents quicken their pace, unwilling to meet its gaze. When the investigator arrives, the first sensation is the silence. Not the ordinary quiet of an abandoned building, but a heavy, pressing stillness, as though the air itself remembers. Dust lies thick on the concrete path. Every step crunches against broken glass and fragments of brick. The sun bleaches the yard into harsh light, but the deeper shadows of the corridors are cold, carrying the faint smell of mildew and something metallic. The walls are scarred with scorch marks, blackened arcs where someone once tried to burn evidence. Steel doors line the hallways, some ajar, some locked, all bearing numbers stenciled in white paint that has long since chipped away. The chapel is the most unsettling. Its wooden pews have been torn from the floor, stacked like barricades against the back wall. The crucifix above the altar remains, but half charred, its surface warped by fire. A shaft of light falls through a cracked stained glass window, painting the floor with fractured colors. Locals had whispered for years that the chapel had been converted into a holding cell when the facility grew overcrowded. Now, with the evidence before him, the investigator sees the makeshift bars welded across side doors, the etched marks on the walls, tallies, scratched in by fingernails or the edge of a coin. They stop suddenly at uneven intervals, as if cut short. The echoes inside the detention block feel alive. A dropped stone rolls into the distance, reverberating off unseen passages. One hallway is blocked with sheets of corrugated steel bolted over the entrance. Faded signs point toward records, infirmary, and lower cells, but only the infirmary remains accessible. Its cabinets stand open, their glass shattered, shelves stripped bare. A few labels remain: morphine, antiseptic, bandages. The counters are stained with brown streaks. In a corner, the investigator finds a drawer that will not close, jammed by a stack of files warped from water damage. Each file tab bears a number, not a name. Many pages are blank where forms were ripped out. Stepping deeper into the grounds, the air grows colder despite the afternoon sun outside. The corridors narrow, ceilings lower, and the smell intensifies. In one cell, graffiti is scrawled in charcoal across the plaster, lines of scripture, a plea for mercy, and what appears to be a date, March 18, 1995, just 3 weeks after the official detention of the 5 nuns. The script is hurried, uneven, as though written in desperation. Another wall bears only a single word: silenced. Outside, near the crumbling guard towers, the investigator meets locals who linger at a distance. One elderly man remembers hearing screams at night even after the facility was said to have closed. Another claims soldiers were seen, carrying crates out of the grounds under floodlights, the trucks leaving in the direction of the mountains. None of these accounts were ever taken seriously. They lived as whispers passed along at kitchen tables. But now, with the building itself offering scars and evidence, those whispers feel heavier, closer to the truth. Standing in the yard, the investigator notices something odd. A newer lock has been placed on a storage shed beside the chapel, its metal uncorroded compared to the rest of the facility. Someone has returned here within the last decade. Someone cared enough to keep one door sealed while everything else fell into ruin. The discovery raises a question that will linger through the investigation. If the story of the 5 nuns ended here, why is someone still guarding part of this place? The first visit ends not with answers, but with a profound unease. The detention center holds its secrets tightly, yet the scars it bears contradict the official story of safe transfers and routine closures. The air tastes of ash and rust, but also of unfinished business. As the investigator leaves the grounds, the chapel's broken crucifix catches the late sun, casting a warped shadow across the yard. It feels less like a monument of faith than a silent witness to what happened behind these walls. The journals arrive in a cardboard evidence box, their covers warped and edges curled from years of damp confinement. The twine binding them together has frayed into fibers that cling to the investigator's gloves. At first glance, they appear ordinary, cheap notebooks with cardboard backs, the kind one might use for grocery lists or school notes. But the moment the pages are turned, it becomes clear these are not idle scribbles. Each entry is dated, written in a hand that grows shakier as the pages progress, and the ink ranges from bold black to faded gray, as though the author had to use whatever pen she could find. The earliest entries are simple, almost domestic in tone. They describe daily prayers, the smell of soap on newly washed habits, the comfort of communal meals. One line reads, "We remind each other that even here, His presence is not absent." These passages create a painful contrast to what follows. Within a week, the writing shifts into fragments, snatches of overheard conversations, descriptions of being watched, repeated mentions of the men with boots. Some entries detail interrogations. The author describes being taken from her cell, blindfolded, and seated in a room where questions circled endlessly around the same subjects: who she had met, what she had said, whether the convent was harboring dissidents. The tone is restrained, almost formal, but the gaps between words, long dashes, sudden unfinished sentences, speak of exhaustion and fear. One entry ends mid-thought. "Tonight they said we would be moved to another." The line trails off, the ink smudged as though the notebook had been closed quickly, or a hand had been pulled away. The most chilling pages are written in code. Instead of sentences, the nun fills lines with scripture references, arranging them in patterns that only make sense when read aloud together. Cross-referencing reveals the verses all point to themes of betrayal, exile, and hidden captivity. It becomes clear that the journals were not only a record but a means of communication, perhaps intended for anyone who might one day find them. The codes suggest the women understood they might not survive, but hoped their words would. Inserted between two sections is a loose sheet of paper, folded carefully despite its brittle edges. On it are 5 names, theirs, written one beneath the other. Beside each name is a short phrase: quiet strength, the one who sings, teacher, keeper of the door, our youngest. It reads like a roll call, or perhaps a way to preserve identity in a place designed to erase it. Seeing the names together in her handwriting gives the women presence again, restoring them from statistics to people with lives, roles, and bonds. The dates in the journals carry their own weight. Several entries contradict the state's timeline. For example, the official record claims all 5 were transferred on March 10, 1995. Yet an entry dated March 14th describes hearing distant bells from the chapel, followed by the sound of trucks moving in the yard. Another, dated March 17th, mentions one sister falling ill and being denied medicine. These small details chip away at the official story, revealing a slow process of disappearance rather than a single transfer. Toward the final pages, the handwriting becomes cramped, almost frantic. Words overlap, margins fill with side notes, and scripture references multiply. The last legible entry, dated March 20th, contains only a single line: "We are not leaving by choice." Below it, a dark streak cuts diagonally across the page, neither ink nor pencil but something thicker, as if the writer's hand had trembled while pressing down with force. Holding the journals, the investigator feels the claustrophobic presence of the women's final days. The objects from the locker are no longer just relics but voices, insistent and unyielding, speaking across decades. Their words do what officials had tried to prevent. They anchor the nuns in time and place, refusing erasure. The journals leave behind no clear map, no neat conclusion, only fragments arranged like scattered breadcrumbs. Yet in those fragments lies undeniable proof. The 5 women were alive beyond the dates the state recorded, writing until the very edge of their disappearance. The weight of that realization lingers long after the pages are closed. The journals transform the investigation from rumor into testimony, from whispers into evidence. They shift the question from "were they taken?" to "where were they taken and why?" She agrees to meet only after weeks of hesitation. At first, her voice on the phone is guarded, brittle with suspicion. But when she finally consents, she chooses a place far from the city, a quiet convent on the edge of farmland where bells mark the hours and the air smells of cut grass and candle wax. The investigator finds her seated beneath a statue of the Virgin, her face half hidden by the folds of her veil. She is in her 70s now, but her eyes carry the alertness of someone who has lived too long with secrets. "I should not be speaking," she begins, even before introductions are finished. Her hands tremble slightly as she folds them in her lap, knuckles thin as bone. But silence is the only thing they ever demanded of us, and silence is what condemned them. She looks away toward the chapel doors as though expecting to be overheard, though only the low hum of bees and distant church bells interrupt the afternoon. She describes the night of the arrests. Soldiers came without warning, their boots echoing in the stone halls of the convent. They moved with purpose, reading names from a list, passing by some sisters while seizing others. The 5 were singled out. One, the youngest, cried out, asking what crime they had committed. No one answered. The elderly nun remembers standing frozen as the women were marched past her, heads bowed, their rosaries clutched so tightly the beads cut into their palms. The soldiers left as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving silence in their wake. For weeks afterward, she says, those remaining at the convent were visited by officials who issued warnings, cloaked as pastoral guidance. "We were told the sisters had been transferred to another assignment," she recalls, her voice tightening. "When we asked where, they told us it was not our concern. When we asked again, they said perhaps we would prefer a new assignment." Ourselves, several of the nuns who pressed harder were reassigned within months, scattered to distant dioceses where communication was limited. It was clear the message was, "Do not ask." What unsettles her most, however, is the memory of one night shortly after. She had been awake, tending to the chapel lamps, when she heard engines idling on the road beyond the convent wall. Through a narrow slit in the shutters, she saw trucks parked under the trees, their lights off. Men in uniforms moved in and out of the convent's rear entrance, the same path the detained sisters had once walked. But the building was empty then, the others long gone. She swears she heard muffled voices, women's voices, though she cannot say for certain if they belonged to the missing 5. The trucks pulled away after midnight, disappearing into the countryside. She never spoke of it until now. Her warning is not only about the past, but about the present. "They will not want this story opened again," she says, leaning forward, her eyes fierce despite her frail frame. "You think time has weakened them? Time has only made their grip stronger. Every question you ask will cost you something. They silenced us in 95, and they will try to silence you now." The investigator presses gently. "Did she ever see the 5 again?" The old nun shakes her head. "No, not with my eyes, only in my prayers." She closes her hands around her rosary and adds, almost in a whisper, "I have always feared that they were not transferred, not relocated but erased." The meeting ends abruptly. She rises, excuses herself, and retreats into the chapel, leaving the investigator with more questions than answers. Yet her testimony carries the weight of lived memory. It confirms what the journals implied. The 5 were targeted deliberately, and their removal was not routine. The warnings from officials, the threat of reassignment, the unexplained trucks, all of it deepens the suspicion that their disappearance was not an accident of history but a calculated act. Driving away from the convent, the investigator notices a figure in plain clothes sitting in a parked car near the entrance. The man does not move, does not acknowledge them, just watches. The warning from the elderly sister echoes in the investigator's mind. They will not want this story opened again. The pushback begins quietly, almost predictably. At first it comes in the form of bureaucratic replies. Polite but firm letters on crisp letterhead, stamped with the insignia of state archives and clerical offices. Each one contains the same refrain. The case was investigated at the time. The sisters were safely transferred. All records have been accounted for. Some letters add a line about misplaced documentation, or archival deterioration, as though 30 years of dust could explain the absence of entire lives. When the investigator files a request to access the detention center's intake logs from March 1995, the response arrives within days. No such documents exist. Yet days earlier, in the crumbling infirmary, water-damaged files had already been found. The contradiction is glaring, but the tone of the denial is absolute. It reads less like an admission of missing paperwork, and more like a closing door. Phone calls follow. Officials from the Ministry of Justice insist that revisiting closed cases serves no public good. Cleric in a high office warns against reopening wounds that have long been healed by faith. The words are measured, yet beneath their surface lies a threat, the suggestion that to pursue this story further is not only fruitless but dangerous. The investigator begins receiving anonymous calls at night, the lines silent except for the faint hiss of breath before a click. In the press, subtle counter-narratives emerge. A brief editorial in a government-aligned paper frames the 5 nuns as troubled women, implying without evidence that they may have left their convent voluntarily. Another article suggests the discovery of the locker is a fabrication, an opportunistic hoax exploiting religious symbols. The timing is too sharp to be coincidence. Someone is working to seed doubt before the investigation gains momentum. Even in the community, pressure mounts. A parish official who initially agreed to speak withdraws suddenly, citing health reasons. Families of the missing sisters receive unexpected visits from municipal officers reminding them of the danger of spreading false rumors. One brother of a missing nun confides off the record that he has been told his business license may not be renewed if he continues to cooperate. The machinery of denial is not limited to the past. It is still active, reshaping the present. The most unnerving moment comes when the investigator attempts to access parish archives believed to hold baptismal certificates and personnel files. Upon arrival, the office door is locked, though staff are visible inside. After a long wait, a clerk emerges only to state flatly, "The records you asked for were destroyed in a flood years ago." Yet, behind her on a shelf sits a stack of intact binders, their spines labeled with years that include 1995. She closes the door firmly before any further questions can be asked. The denial does more than obstruct. It creates a sense of suffocation. Each attempt to peel back a layer of history is met with a stronger hand pressing it closed. The official line, that the sisters were safely transferred, remains unyielding, even as evidence mounts against it. The state insists it has nothing to hide, yet its urgency in silencing inquiry betrays the opposite. Late one evening, as the investigator prepares notes from the day, an envelope slides under the hotel room door. No return address, no markings. Inside is a single sheet of paper typed in block letters. "You are being watched. Stop digging or you will be next." There is no signature, no fingerprint, only the faint scent of cigarette smoke clinging to the paper. The warning is crude, but its message is clear. The more the story advances, the higher the stakes become. The official denials are no longer just bureaucratic language. They are a shield protecting something far larger than a clerical error. And the shield is not passive. It is armed. The tape recorder is heavier than it looks. A squat black rectangle with scuffed corners and a cracked plastic window over the reels. The investigator places it on a table under a pool of yellow light, the kind of lamp that makes dust visible in the air. The machine smells faintly of mildew and old wiring. When the play button is pressed, the motor whines but refuses to turn. The reels sit motionless, as if resisting. It takes a specialist, an audio restorer, working out of a cramped basement studio, to coax the recorder back to life. The restoration begins with careful cleaning. Dust is blown from the gears, the belts replaced, the corroded batteries pried out with tweezers. Each adjustment is done in silence, broken only by the click of tools and the low hum of a soldering iron. Finally, the restorer threads the fragile tape onto a newer deck, rigged to capture every sound digitally in case the original shreds. The machine whirs and the room fills with the hiss of static, a ghostly exhalation from 3 decades ago. At first, the recording seems unusable, just white noise like rain on a roof. But as the hiss steadies, faint voices surface. They are muffled, distant, yet undeniably human. The restorer adjusts the levels, and suddenly the room fills with the sound of a woman praying. Her words are halting, whispered, but clear enough. "Deliver us from evil. Deliver us from evil." She repeats the line over and over, her voice breaking. Then come footsteps, heavy, measured, the unmistakable cadence of boots on concrete. They grow louder, overlapping the prayers, until another sound intrudes, the metallic rattle of a chain, followed by the scrape of a door opening. There are voices now, male, sharp, speaking in clipped tones that the recorder captures only in fragments. "Orders tonight. Not on the list. Move them now." The words are broken, but the urgency is unmistakable. The most chilling moment arrives halfway through. The prayer cuts off with a gasp, followed by muffled shouts. There is a scuffle, objects being moved, a sharp cry that ends abruptly. For several seconds the tape erupts in distortion, as if the recorder itself recoiled from what it was capturing. Then comes silence, broken only by the faint hum of the motor and the distant clang of metal. Just when it seems the recording is over, a final layer emerges. A man's voice, closer to the recorder than any before, says a single sentence: "Seal the lower wing. No one leaves from here." His tone is flat, authoritative, final. Immediately after, the tape cuts to static, the reel running empty until it clicks to a stop. The room where the tape is played remains still for a long time afterward. The investigator, the restorer, and a few trusted listeners exchange glances but say nothing. The evidence is no longer speculative. It is audible, visceral. The nuns were not merely transferred, they were contained, silenced, and likely removed under orders. The prayers, the boots, the command to seal the wing. Each sound builds a timeline that contradicts every official denial. The recording becomes a turning point. Unlike written journals that can be dismissed as fabrications, or testimony that can be labeled as faulty memory, the tape is raw, mechanical, undeniable. It carries not interpretation but presence, the actual voices, the actual moments preserved by chance in a machine forgotten in a locker. The state can argue, the press can spin, but no one can unhear the prayer cut short by marching boots. Yet with proof comes risk. To play the tape publicly would be to cross a line, challenging institutions powerful enough to erase people. To keep it private would be to betray the very voices crying out on it. The investigator leaves the studio with a digital copy hidden carefully, aware that possession of the recording has shifted the danger from abstract to immediate. The cassette is no longer just an artifact. It is evidence, and evidence makes enemies. The contradictions reveal themselves first in the margins. Small details that should align, but don't. The investigator spreads documents across a hotel desk, pinning them down with coffee mugs and notebooks to keep them from sliding to the floor. On one side are the official transfer records, stamped March 22, 1995, showing the 5 nuns moved from the detention facility to a convent in the north. On the other side lies a copy of a parish newsletter, dated March 25th, that mentions the same women still being held pending clearance. The two dates, placed side by side, cannot both be true. The paper trail grows stranger as more fragments are unearthed. A municipal ledger shows food supplies requisitioned for 15 detainees in early April 1995, yet the transfer record insists the sisters were no longer there. A staff roster from the detention center lists 2 guards assigned to Wing C, a section supposedly closed at the time. Their names appear on duty logs for weeks after the official closure date. One of the guards signed in on April 10th, hours before the fire. Suppression system recorded an unexplained alarm in that same wing. In a dusty box retrieved from the town hall's basement, the investigator finds correspondence between the Ministry of Interior and local authorities. The letters are curt, written in typewriter ink that has begun to fade, but one line leaps out: ensure removal of special detainees before press inquiry. No names are attached, no context offered, but the timing, just days before the nuns were said to vanish, fits too neatly to ignore. The more documents surface, the more they contradict the official narrative. Stamps don't match, dates overlap incorrectly, and signatures vary in style, as if multiple hands attempted to forge consistency. A baptismal certificate for one of the nuns was marked updated in 1996, though she was officially recorded as having left the convent permanently the year before. The file is unsigned, its seal embossed but faint, like a copy of a copy. Each anomaly builds a portrait of deliberate manipulation. The records are not merely incomplete, they are curated, pruned, arranged to tell a story that never happened. The official version insists on a seamless transfer, yet every surviving scrap insists on chaos, concealment, and silence. What unsettles the investigator most is the systematic nature of the contradictions. These are not random clerical mistakes. They are coordinated. Someone went to great lengths to scrub and rewrite history, but in doing so left behind seams that can still be pried apart. The dates that don't match, the requisitions that shouldn't exist, the duty rosters for wings that were closed, all serve as fingerprints of a cover-up executed in haste. Late at night, the investigator assembles the fragments into a timeline. The sisters were detained in mid-March. Officially, they were transferred on March 22, but records show them still present on March 25. Supply ledgers extend their presence into April, and a fire alarm in Wing C confirms activity weeks after the transfer. Sometime between late March and mid-April, the trail goes dark. The voices on the tape, the command to seal the wing, fall squarely in this gap. The silence of those weeks becomes the loudest evidence of all. No parish newsletters, no public announcements, no letters from the sisters' families survive. It is as though time itself was erased, leaving only scattered clues that slipped through the cracks. And in those cracks, the truth waits. As the investigator leans back from the desk, exhausted, the pattern is undeniable. The contradictions are no longer scattered details but a web, tightening around a single conclusion. The 5 nuns never left the detention center alive. Their disappearance was not an accident of bureaucracy. It was engineered, signed off and buried under paper designed to contradict itself. Just enough to confuse but not enough to prove. The trail is fragile, easily dismissed by those in power. But for the first time, it is also undeniable. The story the state has defended for nearly 3 decades is unraveling, one broken date at a time. The first living witness comes forward reluctantly, and only after weeks of quiet persuasion. She is not a guard, not an official, but a nurse who once worked shifts at the detention center's infirmary. Her name is kept off the record at her request. She fears reprisal even now, almost 30 years later. When the investigator meets her, it is in a dimly lit kitchen of a modest apartment, curtains drawn tightly, the television left on low volume to mask conversation. She stirs tea with shaking hands, her eyes darting to the window as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. Her story begins in fragments. She recalls the spring of 1995 as a season of unease, extra security at the facility, sudden restrictions on where staff could walk, hushed conversations among senior officers. The 5 nuns, she says, were kept separate from other detainees. They were lodged in what was then called Wing C, a section supposedly designated for sensitive cases. She remembers seeing them, escorted to the infirmary, thin and pale. One of them coughing so severely she was given medicine under her supervision. Their presence was never acknowledged officially. In staff logs, the 5 were listed only as patients. The nurse pauses often, clutching her teacup, her voice lowering as she speaks. She describes one night in particular, late March. Alarms were briefly triggered. Not the kind that blare for evacuation, but the low buzz that signals restricted movement. She was ordered to remain in the infirmary, but through the walls she heard boots, shouting, and the unmistakable clatter of chains being dragged. Later, when she tried to leave, she found Wing C's corridor blocked by 2 guards she did not recognize. They wore no badges, only plain uniforms, and they told her flatly that the wing was off limits for maintenance. Her testimony carries details impossible to invent casually. She recalls the layout of Wing C, the thick steel door that required 2 keys, the way the hallway smelled of disinfectant masking something stronger, metallic. She remembers seeing one of the nuns clutching a scrap of paper during an infirmary visit, as though trying to conceal it in her sleeve. When she reached for it to prevent it from falling, the nun whispered a single word, north, before a guard stepped between them. The nurse never saw that nun again. In early April, she was suddenly reassigned to another facility. The order came without explanation. She was told her records would remain sealed for transfer purposes. To this day, she has no copy of her employment file from those months. It was as though she had never worked there at all. She only learned of the sisters' official transfer later, when she heard a priest mention it during Mass. The date given did not match the day she had last seen them alive. The weight of her words presses heavily in the room. She admits she has carried this for decades. Silenced by fear and convinced no one would believe her, she still believes someone is listening. More than once during the conversation, she stops mid-sentence, her eyes flicking to the hallway outside her apartment door, as though sensing movement. When asked why she chose to speak now, she answers simply, "Because if I stay silent, then they never lived at all." Her warning comes at the end of the meeting. She leans forward, her voice barely above a whisper, and says, "Whatever you think you found, it goes higher. The order didn't come from here, not from this town. Don't trust the records. They were made to protect them, not you." And if you publish anything, you should be ready to run. The investigator leaves with notes, scribbled hastily in a mind heavy with the knowledge that the story has broken open, wider than expected. This is no longer just about missing nuns or old files. It is about living witnesses who are still being silenced, and forces that remain invested in keeping the past buried. The witnesses' trembling words confirm what the tape and the contradictions already suggested. The sisters did not vanish by chance. They were erased by design. The backlash begins before the investigator has even finished transcribing notes from the witness meeting. It starts with subtle signals: an unfamiliar car parked across from the hotel for 3 nights in a row, its driver never stepping out. A room service order arrives at the wrong door, but the tray carries a folded slip of paper tucked under the napkin. Stop while you still can. The handwriting is blocky, anonymous. When the investigator asks the front desk who delivered it, no one recalls seeing anyone at all. Soon, the intimidation turns sharper. An email inbox fills with messages from untraceable accounts, each subject line the same: liar. The contents vary, some accusations of fabricating evidence, others thinly veiled threats. One message includes a pixelated image of the investigator leaving the witness's apartment, time-stamped and dated. The photo is blurry but unmistakably real, proof that someone is watching closely enough to track movements in real time. Official pressure mounts just as quickly. A summons arrives from the regional administrative office, requesting a formal interview about the investigation's methods. The letter is polite, but its language is steeped in veiled accusation, potential interference with sealed state matters, and possible violations of historical preservation statutes. The implication is clear: pursue this story further, and it could be reframed as a legal offense. The investigator also notices the quiet erosion of cooperation. The archivist who once allowed access to parish ledgers now refuses to return calls. A local historian who had agreed to share personal research suddenly insists she has nothing relevant after receiving what she described as a reminder visit from municipal officials. Even the audio specialist who restored the tape reports being followed home by a man smoking in his driveway, a man who disappeared when approached. The circle of silence tightens, not only around the investigator, but also around anyone who dares to assist. The press joins the effort, framing the growing investigation as sensationalism. Major newspaper runs an editorial, dismissing the entire case as a tragic but ordinary episode of poor record-keeping exploited by outsiders. The language mirrors the exact phrasing used in the ministry's denials, suggesting coordination. Public sentiment begins to fracture. Some community members whisper their support in private, but others, fearing association, label the investigator an agitator stirring up ghosts. The most direct warning arrives one night outside the hotel. Returning late, the investigator finds the door to the room ajar. Inside, nothing is stolen, but the notes from the witness interview have been moved. The handwriting is untouched, but at the bottom of one page, someone has scrawled a single word in red ink: enough. No one at the front desk recalls seeing anyone enter the room. Security cameras for the hallway, the staff says, had been offline for maintenance. All of it, the shadowing, the legal threats, the planted editorials, creates a suffocating pressure, the sense of an invisible wall closing in. It is not only about silencing the story, but isolating its pursuer, cutting off trust and making every door seem dangerous to knock on. The system has moved from denial to counterattack. Yet the intimidation has an unintended effect. Instead of closing the investigation, it confirms its stakes. Institutions do not go to such lengths to protect clerical errors. The escalation itself becomes evidence, proof that the truth threatens something powerful enough to mobilize both official channels and unseen actors. The message is clear: keep pushing, and the consequences will grow. But so too is the counter-message whispered by the witness. If you stop, they vanish all over again. The investigator sits at the desk that night, staring at the marked notes, and makes a quiet decision. The threats will not be ignored, but neither will the voices on the tape, nor the timeline torn apart by contradictions, nor the nurse's trembling testimony. If the machinery of silence has shifted into motion, then the only way forward is through it, even if it means stepping into direct conflict with the institutions that created it. The return to the detention center feels like trespass, even though the building has long been abandoned. The front gates sag on their hinges, flaking rust that stains the palms when pushed open. Weeds claw through cracks in the asphalt, and birds nest in the rafters where watchlights once glared. Yet the silence is deceptive. Every step inside carries the weight of knowing this was the last place 5 Women were seen alive. The investigator moves through the corridors with a flashlight, the beam catching scraps of peeling, paint and faded slogans, still stenciled on the walls. The air smells of damp stone and mildew, layered with something older, an acrid tang, as though the building itself has absorbed every fear and cry it once held. The plan is simple. Retrace the path to Wing C, the section the witness described, and look for what the official records insist no longer exists. The wing is sealed, just as the tape had suggested. A heavy metal door bars the way, its surface scarred by time but still locked. The padlock appears newer than the surrounding decay, its metal shiny and intact. Someone cared enough to preserve this closure long after the facility was abandoned. After careful effort, the lock gives way, snapping under the pry of a crowbar brought for the purpose. The sound echoes down the corridor like a gunshot, startling in the silence. Inside, the wing is colder, the air heavier. The flashlight beam reveals a row of small rooms, each with narrow doors and observation slits. Dust lies thick on the floor, but here and there are signs of disturbance, boot prints that don't match the age of the decay, scuffs along the walls as if furniture, or objects were dragged through long after the facility was shuttered. Something about the wing feels wrong, not merely abandoned but curated, preserved for reasons unknown. At the far end, behind a partially collapsed partition, the investigator finds it. A storage alcove sealed crudely with a sheet of corrugated metal. The panel is nailed into the stone with irregular strokes like a hurried job. Pulling it free releases a rush of stale air and the faint rattle of objects shifting. Inside is a cache, a small chamber stacked with boxes, sacks, and wooden crates. Dust clings to everything, but the moment the beam of light falls on the contents, the atmosphere changes. This is not random debris. It is deliberate storage. One box holds personal belongings, rosaries, folded habits, a worn hymnal with pages stuck together by age. Another contains medical supplies, their expiration dates frozen in the mid-1990s. In a corner rests a crate marked with a faded shipping stencil, inside of which lie dozens of sealed envelopes. The handwriting varies, but many are addressed to families of the missing nuns. None appear to have been sent. Their seals remain intact, their messages forever withheld. The most striking find sits atop a pile of cloth, a series of Polaroid photographs, their colors faded but images unmistakable. They show the sisters, sitting against the wall of Wing C, their faces gaunt but defiant. In one photo, a nun clutches a piece of paper with something scrawled in thick marker. The words are blurred, but the last line is legible. "We are not being moved." The chamber tells a story far different from the one in the official record. These were not women transferred quietly to another convent. They were confined here, writing desperate letters that never reached their families, leaving fragments of themselves in a place designed to erase them. The belongings are not relics of lives resumed. Elsewhere, they are the evidence of lives, cut short within these walls. As the investigator documents the cache, the unease grows. The space feels less like a forgotten corner and more like a time capsule, deliberately sealed. The question is immediate. Who locked these things away? Were they meant to be hidden forever, or preserved for someone to find? And why, after 30 years, does this wing remain sealed with a new lock, as if guarded even in ruin? The discovery is overwhelming, the air in the chamber stifling, pressing down with the weight of everything it holds. This is no longer speculation or testimony. This is material proof. The tape gave sound, the contradictions gave shape, the witness gave memory. Now the cache gives presence. The sisters were here. They left traces that were never meant to survive. And yet here they are, waiting to be seen. But even in the triumph of discovery, danger lingers. The cache was hidden for a reason. Whoever locked it away may not welcome its unearthing. And the photographs, especially the one declaring, "We are not being moved," are not just artifacts. They are direct defiance. Voices echoing across decades, daring the truth to be heard at last. The release of the artifacts is not done lightly. Days pass as the investigator debates the risk, weighing the power of secrecy against the urgency of exposure. But the cache is too strong, too undeniable to be kept hidden. When the photographs and unsent letters are finally shared, first with a trusted journalist, then with a wider press outlet, the effect is immediate and explosive. Headlines spread across local and national media. Artifacts suggest nuns never transferred in 1995. Sealed wing discovery reopens dark chapter. Photographs contradict state narrative. Images of the sisters, frail but alive inside the detention center, fill screens and front pages. The line in thick marker, "We are not being moved," becomes a rallying cry, printed on banners and whispered in community gatherings. The story that had lingered in the margins for decades is suddenly public, undeniable, and personal. The families of the missing are the first to respond. Some express grief, their pain raw as they recognize familiar rosaries, familiar handwriting, faces they have not seen in 30 years. Others show anger, demanding explanations for the lies they were fed, the letters they never received, the decades wasted believing their sisters and daughters had been safely transferred. Candlelight vigils are organized outside the ruins of the detention center. People gather, holding the images aloft, turning the neglected building into a living memorial. The institutions, however, move just as quickly to contain the fallout. The Ministry of Justice issues a statement dismissing the artifacts as inconclusive and the photographs as likely staged. A clerical authority goes further, calling the release a deliberate attempt to discredit the sanctity of religious institutions. Officials repeat the same phrase across outlets. There is no evidence these items are authentic to the 1995 case. The coordination is unmistakable. Soon, a counter-narrative blooms in the press. Opinion columns claim the photographs could have been faked, the letters planted. Commentators on state television suggest the artifacts were placed in the wing by agitators seeking attention. One anchor smirks as he describes the case as an elaborate urban legend, even as the images of the sisters appear over his shoulder. The strategy is clear. Flood the public with doubt, not by disproving the evidence, but by drowning it in suspicion. The community fractures under the weight of competing truths. Some demand a full investigation, their voices rising in protest outside municipal buildings. Others, influenced by the official line, dismiss the revelations as disturbances stirred up by outsiders. Families of the missing find themselves harassed. One brother of a nun is followed home after speaking to a reporter. Another receives an unsigned note telling him to let the dead rest. Fear once again becomes a weapon, this time aimed at silencing grief as much as truth. The investigator, too, feels the shift. Journalists who once clamored for interviews now hesitate, aware of the risk of losing access or credibility by being associated with a story branded as conspiratorial. Local radio station cancels a scheduled segment, citing pressure from above. Even the journalist who first broke the story confides in private that their editor has been warned about legal consequences. But for all the attempts to suffocate it, the evidence refuses to die. The photographs circulate online, shared and reshared beyond the reach of censors. The unsent letters are transcribed and posted, their words echoing across forums, each line carrying the unmistakable cadence of desperate voices. Independent researchers begin to cross-reference the names, dates, and handwriting styles, finding consistencies that bolster authenticity. For every article branding the case a hoax, another rises in defense of its truth. The release becomes a dividing line, not only in the community, but in the nation's memory. It forces a choice: believe the polished official record, or trust the fragments wrestled from decay and silence. Neither choice is without consequence, but one carries the weight of human voices that refuse to be erased. And at the center of it all stands the investigator, pulled between recognition and rejection, between the families who finally see proof and the institutions working to bury it once again. The discovery has been made public, but the cost is only beginning. Because once the artifacts are out, they cannot be taken back, and those who want them forgotten will not stop until they are erased once more, along with anyone who dares to hold them up to the light. The storm reaches its breaking point when a rumor surfaces about a lower level beneath the detention center, an unfinished tunnel network that never appeared on blueprints but was whispered about by former staff. The witness had mentioned it once in passing, a sub-basement where access was restricted even to employees. Now, with the release of the artifacts fueling public demand for answers, the investigator decides to confront the rumor directly. What had been a speculative thread becomes the target of a high-risk exploration. The night chosen is moonless, the sky smothered in clouds that erase shadows. The approach to the detention center is careful, every step calculated. The outer fence, long rusted, offers little resistance, but the silence on the grounds feels hostile, like an audience holding its breath. The investigator is not alone. Two allies accompany them, a freelance cameraman and a local activist who lost an aunt in the same facility during the 1990s. They bring equipment, lanterns, ropes, spare batteries, aware that once inside, turning back might not be possible. The known wing gives way to a stairwell concealed behind a wall panel, pried open with effort. The steps descend steeply, each one coated with dust that betrays how few have walked here in decades. The air thickens, damp and metallic, carrying the smell of stagnant water. At the bottom lies a rusted gate chained shut. But the chain is brittle, breaking with a twist of a crowbar. Beyond it, the tunnel yawns open. The passage is narrow, built from rough stone and lined with corroded pipes. Water drips rhythmically from above, echoing like a metronome that marks every cautious step. The beam of the flashlight reveals marks on the walls, chalk symbols, faint scratches that look like tallies. They are not the work of workers finishing construction. They look like messages left behind in desperation. One sequence of marks forms the shape of a cross. Another spells out a name only half legible, Maria. Further in, the tunnel widens into a chamber. Here, the air is colder and the silence heavier. Against one wall lies a pile of wooden crates similar to those found in the cache above. Inside are more personal effects: shoes, rosary beads, fragments of letters. But these are accompanied by something else. A line of iron hooks fixed to the wall, their surfaces rusted but unmistakably designed for restraint. The cameraman lowers his lens, unable to keep filming for a moment. The activist whispers a prayer under their breath. It is then that the danger becomes palpable. A sound carries through the tunnel. Distant, deliberate, the scrape of stone or metal. It is not the building settling. It is footsteps. The group kills their lights, holding their breath, as a beam of light flickers in the distance. Someone else is here. The intruders move with purpose, their own flashlights sweeping methodically across the walls. Voices murmur, low and urgent, too far away to understand but close enough to know they are searching. The investigator realizes the artifacts above were not merely overlooked. This place is still watched, still guarded. Whoever sealed the caches never stopped checking them, and now the investigation has crossed into their domain. The group retreats deeper into the tunnel, guided only by the faint memory of the witness's words. There was a sealed lower wing. The air grows tighter, the passage narrowing, until they reach another iron door. This one half buried in rubble. Painted across its surface in faded red is a single warning word: Prohibido. Behind them, the voices draw closer. The investigator feels the weight of choice. Pressing down, open the sealed door and risk being trapped, or retreat and lose the one chance at uncovering what lay beneath. The cameraman whispers that they must go. The activist insists that this is why they came. The decision is made with shaking hands. The door is forced, the hinges groaning like an animal waking from sleep. Inside, the group stumbles into a cavernous room. The flashlight beams sweep across it, catching glimpses of stacked files, broken chairs, and a row of beds bolted to the floor. On one bed rests a small wooden cross carved crudely, with 5 initials scratched into its surface. The air is suffocating, filled with the weight of all that transpired here. And then, the footsteps stop. Silence complete and absolute. The group knows they are not alone. But in the blackness of the tunnels, knowledge is useless. The chamber that was supposed to provide answers instead becomes a crucible, a place where danger and revelation collide. The set piece is no longer exploration, it is survival. In that moment, the investigator understands what the witness meant. The order didn't come from here. This tunnel, this hidden level, was never meant to be found, and those who sealed it are still determined to keep it that way. The events in the tunnel cannot be contained. Though the group barely escapes the sub-basement, muddy, shaken, and pursued by shadows they cannot name, their footage survives. The cameraman's lens caught enough. The marks scratched into stone, the iron hooks along the wall, the initials carved into the wooden cross. Grainy, imperfect, but real. When fragments of the footage are released online days later, they ignite like dry tinder. The public fallout is immediate and fierce. Protests erupt outside municipal buildings. Crowds carrying enlarged prints of the Polaroids alongside stills from the tunnel video. Vigils swell into demonstrations, chants rising. Where are they? Who sealed the wing? Families of the missing speak openly now, no longer confined to whispers. They hold up the unsent letters, the rosaries, the photographs, turning private grief into public indictment. The state responds with a predictable script: denial, dismissal, and discrediting. A hastily convened press conference insists the tunnel footage is misinterpreted construction. Debris. Officials claim the hooks were utility fixtures and the initials graffiti. Yet the defensive tone betrays unease. Their language grows sharper with each passing day, as if aware that control of the narrative is slipping. Soon, legislative hearings are announced, framed as an inquiry into the mishandling of archival records. The title is bureaucratic, almost sterile, but the hearing room becomes a theater of moral reckoning. Families testify before rows of suited officials, holding up artifacts that no government statement can erase. A brother of one of the nuns trembles as he reads from his sister's unsent letter. A former guard, emboldened by the public outcry, steps forward to admit that Wing C was sealed under orders he never understood. His voice shakes, but his testimony lands like thunder. The media splits down the middle. Independent outlets replay the footage relentlessly, analyzing every shadow, every scratch mark on the walls. Anchors frame it as proof of systemic cover-up. In contrast, state-aligned networks flood the airwaves with counter-programming. Archival footage of the nuns smiling at earlier ceremonies. Clips of clerics declaring the transfer peaceful and sanctioned. Commentator sneers that ghost hunters are rewriting history. The battle is no longer only about what happened in 1995, but about who controls the memory of it in 2024. Communities fracture under the pressure. Some parishes organize public prayers for truth, draping their churches with banners reading, "Justice for the Five." Others denounce the protests as sacrilege, warning that digging into old wounds undermines faith and unity. Families find themselves harassed. Letters slipped under doors calling them liars. Shop windows broken after vigils. The conflict seeps into dinner tables and workplaces. A schism between those who believe the sisters were erased and those who cling to the official record. For the investigator, the fallout is suffocating. Every movement is tracked. Anonymous cars idle outside each residence they visit. Invitations to speak at community gatherings are met with counter-warnings. Police will shut it down. Yet the demand for answers only grows. Journalists press for interviews. Activists beg for more footage. Families ask if there are more artifacts hidden still. The weight of being a conduit between silence and exposure grows unbearable. The hearings reach their climax when the restored audio tape is played publicly. For the first time, in a crowded hall with cameras rolling, the crackling prayer of the nun fills the air, followed by boots, chains, and the chilling command, "Seal the lower wing." No one leaves from here. The room falls silent. Even the officials, so practiced in deflection, cannot hide their discomfort. One shifts in his chair, his jaw tight. The sound is irrefutable. Voices from the past reaching across decades to contradict the lies. The release of the tape marks a point of no return. The institutions can continue to deny, but they can no longer erase. The question now is not if something happened, but who ordered it and why. The public sphere has been transformed into a battleground where memory, grief, and power collide. The truth has escaped the shadows of the detention center. It now lives in the streets, in the chants of protesters, in the trembling voices of families who refuse to be silenced again. Yet amid the roar of exposure, one fact lingers quietly. Unresolved, no bodies have been found. Proof of disappearance, of silencing, of erasure, yes. Proof of what became of the 5 women, still missing. The absence of closure keeps the story open. A wound that bleeds not just history, but the present. And somewhere in that gap, the forces determined to bury the truth still wait, watching, planning their next move. The reckoning does not come as a single moment of triumph, but as a slow, uneasy settling. Weeks after the hearings, the landscape of the city and its communities has changed. Murals appear on concrete walls. 5 silhouettes of women in habits, their faces unfinished, painted deliberately as outlines so that the absence itself becomes part of the art. Candles line the steps of churches that once remained silent, their flames tended not just by families but by strangers, who feel drawn into the story, as if the 5 nuns now belong to everyone. A memorial is organized on the outskirts of the old detention center. The grounds are overgrown and fenced, but the crowd gathers anyway, spilling into the road, holding photographs and flowers. Survivors from other facilities stand shoulder to shoulder with relatives of the disappeared, their presence both solidarity and testimony. Some officials attend reluctantly, their speeches scripted and cautious, filled with phrases like commitment to transparency and healing old wounds. Their words fall flat, drowned out by the sobbing of families who have no bodies to bury, only artifacts to hold. The investigator walks among the crowd, not as an outsider but as someone tethered now to the story. Strangers clasp their hand, whispering thank you with eyes that carry both gratitude and burden. The weight of those artifacts, the letters, the Polaroids, the cassette, presses harder than ever. They have shifted from evidence to relics, pieces of faith and grief woven together. Displayed at the memorial, they sit under glass, and people file past silently, touching the barrier as though it were skin. One elderly woman faints when she sees her sister's handwriting for the first time in decades. The state, under mounting pressure, announces an independent commission to investigate, yet cynicism runs deep. Families know the gesture is meant to diffuse tension, not deliver justice. The commission is given no subpoena power, no forensic mandate, only a vague directive to review existing records. It is theater, yet even theater has consequence. For the first time, the institutions that denied, threatened, and silenced must at least pretend to answer. In quieter moments, grief takes on new shapes. Families gather in living rooms, listening to the cassette not for evidence but for connection. The whispered prayer of the nun becomes a ritual. Recited in vigils, quoted in leaflets, sung in hushed tones at gravesides. The words shift meaning. What began as a cry in captivity becomes an anthem of endurance. Her voice, once almost lost, now threads through the lives of strangers. The investigator reflects privately that stories like these rarely resolve cleanly. The state will stall, hearings will fade, officials will retire or be replaced. The tunnels will remain sealed, for safety reasons. And yet something irreversible has already happened. Silence has been broken. The sisters are no longer erased. They are present in conversation, in protest, in murals and prayers. They exist again, not in body but in memory and in the living demand for answers. Toward the end of the memorial, candles are placed in the grass to form 5 circles, each one glowing faintly against the dark. As the crowd disperses, someone places a small wooden cross at the center, carved crudely, much like the one found in the tunnel chamber. 5 initials are scratched into its surface. It is both tribute and defiance, a refusal to let absence remain nameless. In the quiet that follows, the investigator senses both closure and incompleteness. The case has shifted from private wound to public record, from whispers to a chorus of voices that cannot be silenced again. And yet the central question, where the sisters are, what truly happened to them, remains unanswered. Closure is partial, fragile, almost illusory. But perhaps that is the nature of legacy. Not to finish a story, but to ensure it cannot be forgotten. The memorial does not end the search. It ensures that the search will continue long after today, and in that persistence lies a different kind of justice, carried forward not by officials, but by the community that refuses to let the 5 vanish again. The last chapter of the story unfolds not in the public glare of protests or hearings, but in the hushed quiet of an archive room miles away from the detention center. Months after the memorial, when the noise of the hearings has begun to dull and news cycles shift to fresher controversies, the investigator receives an unmarked package. Inside is a folder, brittle with age, its cover stamped with the faded insignia of the Ministry of Interior. No return address, no explanation. Only a single handwritten note attached. They missed this. Inside the folder are transfer orders, official, dated March 1995. They bear signatures, stamps, and the names of the 5 nuns. At first glance, it seems to confirm the state's story that the women were moved safely to another facility. But the details unravel quickly. The dates are mismatched. One stamp appearing a full week before the supposed order was issued. The signature of a known official doesn't align with verified samples. Even the typewriter font is inconsistent, as though the document had been patched together. It is not proof of innocence, it is proof of forgery. The investigator runs a finger along the paper, sensing its power and its danger. This file is not merely an artifact. It is evidence of an active deception, crafted not in the chaos of the 1990s but at some later point, likely to reinforce the state's denials. Someone in the present, long after the sisters disappeared, still found it necessary to falsify the past. The discovery sparks both triumph and dread. It provides the missing link. Confirmation that the official story was not just incomplete, but deliberately constructed, yet it also reveals something larger, that the forces behind the cover-up are not relics of a corrupt past, but entities that still operate, still monitor, still protect secrets. The silence is not historical. It is alive. The investigator doesn't release the file immediately. Instead, they sit with it, aware of what it means. To publish would be to escalate, to reopen wounds that the public believes have already been memorialized. But to remain silent is to let the forgery stand unchallenged. It is a choice between protection and exposure, between honoring the closure families have found and pursuing the truth they were denied. Late one evening, they visit the memorial site again. The candles have long since burned out, but fresh flowers still appear at the fence, evidence of families who come quietly, regularly to remember. The mural nearby glows faintly under streetlights, the 5 outlines watching over the city. Standing before them, the investigator feels the weight of the folder in their bag. The decision is not made, but the burden has shifted. The truth is no longer hidden, it is waiting. Before leaving, the investigator notices something new at the base of the mural. Someone has etched a single word into the concrete, barely noticeable but deliberate. Navarro. It is not a family name of the sisters, not a location tied to the detention center. It is unfamiliar, yet it resonates like a code, a breadcrumb left behind. Another place, another lead, another story waiting in the shadows. The narrative of the 5 nuns ends here, with candles, murals, and the partial solace of memory. But the larger arc, The machinery of disappearance, the layers of forgery, the names whispered but never spoken, remains open. Closure has been offered, but not completeness. The folder rests in the investigator's hands as the night closes in. For now it is sealed again, like the tunnels once were. But unlike those tunnels, this door will not remain closed forever. The truth waits, and with it, the next chapter already calls from somewhere else. A single word pointing the way.